It's been exactly 1 year since the two Canadian Michaels were arrested on trumped-up charges in China, and Justin Trudeau still has no idea what to do. China continues to flex its totalitarian muscles, and senior Liberals keep pretending that China is our ally, and Andrew Scheer finally pushes back against media criticism against him. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. We're going to talk a lot about China today. There's a lot to get through, and it has been, like I said off the top, it's been exactly 1 year since the two Michaels were detained in China, basically on trumped-up charges. So you have Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig were arrested, and you have to remember that China is not a Western liberal democracy. China doesn't have the basic tenets of the rule of law like we do in Canada. So while the CFO of Huawei is on house arrest in Vancouver, she has two mansions in Vancouver, so she's basically living a lavish life, although she can't leave her house. These two Michaels who are in prison, basically they're being subject to psychological warfare. They've had lengthy interrogations. They've had no access to lawyers, no access to their families. We hear horror stories about how, for instance, one of them had their glasses taken away, their reading glasses, so they can't spend his time reading. I've read other reports of the lights being left on 24/7 in their cells. So it's hard to imagine and hard to put yourself in the position of one of those two individuals or their families and what they must be living through. But this is like a hostage diplomacy. This is China displaying its tactics, saying that, if you're going to arrest one of our senior officials of a senior company in China, we're going to fight back by detaining two Canadians. And just keep in mind, there are hundreds of thousands of Canadians that live in China, that work in China, that are business people that are over there. And the idea that the Chinese authorities could just detain a Canadian because they're angry over a dispute that's happening with Canada is pretty terrifying, especially given that China is this growing economic and political power in the world. And they really are a menace. And I think that this whole thing just shows how out of water Justin Trudeau is when dealing with a serious diplomatic issue. He looks like a fish out of water. He doesn't know what to do. He has been sending so many mixed messages on China, treating China like an ally, treating China like an adversary. We don't really know. A recent report has come out outlining the horrific conditions. It was actually a leaked report from the Chinese government that got given to the New York Times outlining the detention camps and the prison camps. China has about 1.5 million people, religious minorities, political dissidents, even writers, poets, all kinds of different religious minorities, but mostly Uyghur Muslims. And they are detained in basically concentration camps, detention camps. But then at the same time, we have senior liberal figures continue to kind of compliment China and to celebrate China. We had the former ambassador to China, John McCallum, basically giving advice to China, to Chinese media at a press conference.
We have a system of extradition treaty, a system of rules of law, which are above the government. The government cannot change these things. And as I said, I think Ms. Meng has quite a strong case.
McCallum got fired, but he is far from the only senior liberal person to basically be treating China as an ally throughout this whole ordeal. Former Liberal MP and former Deputy Prime Minister John Manley recently stated that he advised that Canada should do a prisoner swap, a prisoner exchange, to basically pardon the Huawei exec Meng and allow the two Michaels to be freed. Now, this might sound like a sort of silver bullet solution, like, hey, let's get our two Michaels out of prison and back into Canada. But then the idea that you would just basically pardon a corrupt Chinese official, will allegedly corrupt Chinese official, and allow them to get free. The charges, by the way, that this Huawei CFO is being held on are breaking sanctions laws the United States has against Iran. So doing deals with the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, the Iranian regime, that's no small charge. It's a pretty serious accusation. So that's fairly misguided. But again, that's far from the only one. Trudeau recently appointed a new foreign affairs minister, Francois-Philippe Champagne. And a 2017 interview was recently resurfaced. True North was one of the first organizations to report on this. And he was doing an interview in 2017 with a Chinese global television network, which is a state-owned entity. So he's doing an interview with Chinese television, and this is what he had to say about China.
Canada, and I would say China, stands out as beacon of stability, predictability, a rule-based system, a very inclusive society.
So he thinks China is a rules-based system and an inclusive society. Well, in light of this horrific report on the detention of individuals from the Muslim faith in China, it's hardly an inclusive society. And the idea that they're rules-based when they arbitrarily arrest 2 Canadians and hold them without any basic tenets of the rule of law, like even the ability to talk to a lawyer, is absurd. Now, this hadn't happened in 2017, but you have to be pretty naive to believe that this stuff wasn't happening in 2017. Those detention camps that I've been talking about have been running for years, and we've known about them for a very long time. So the fact that Trudeau would promote someone who holds those views, those sort of pro-China, willing to gloss over some of the most wicked human rights abuses in the world and praise China, it comes across as like groveling. It's really, really unfortunate. And again, I think that Trudeau needs to take a stronger stance, and don't hold your breath about that, because the fact that he's been sending these kind of mixed messages is something that they've been doing since he became prime minister. Staying on to China, one of the problems when you have this sort of dispute that's happening between the Hong Kong protesters and the authoritarian Chinese regime is that it sort of spills over into Canada. And we've been seeing that more and more. There's been video surfacing mostly at high schools in and around Vancouver. There was a video that surfaced of a pro-China student pushing a female pro-Hong Kong demonstrators. And another report just came out from a grade 8 student at Richmond Senior Secondary School who displayed a pro-Hong Kong paraphernalia on his locker. And then someone gave him a pro-China anonymous letter that got taped onto his locker. Now, the CBC reported about this, but the CBC didn't do a very good job reporting about it. They only translated the first few words of the report. So True North had the entire letter translated, and I will read from the letter. It says, "The democracy you admire is a piece of bleep. China doesn't need so-called democracy. Please read more books. Insulting our dearest mother nation is absolutely not allowed. Your protest is an evil act." The student accused the Hong Kong student of humiliating the Chinese Communist Party. And then they also wrote, "You need to understand you are selling your soul to the West. Only 2 words can be described of a Hong Konger: lowlife and chicken. Without the Communist Party, today's China would not exist. Without the Communist Party, you Hong Kongers would still be living under the feet of the British." So, this is just one of the major problems that Canada has with our open border immigration system, is that we don't do any kind of testing for basically extreme views. Anyone's just allowed in. So you have people who love freedom and democracy alongside people who love communism and authoritarianism. And, to the author of this letter, if you hate the British and you hate the West, it begs the question of, why did you come to Canada in the first place? Canada is those things as well. And if you love China, and you love communism, you shouldn't bring those values to Canada and try to impose them onto others, especially through a threatening, menacing letter. And like I said, this is just the beginning. This stuff is happening in the Chinese diaspora in Canada, all over the place. And I think it's very problematic. You can check out that exclusive report that we have over at TNC. And, this is, again, just the beginning of the problems with China. There was a video that surfaced earlier this month of an individual who looks like they had committed some wrongthink by commenting on a message from WeChat, commenting about police. And the video is absolutely chilling. This is how individuals are treated in China. It is a authoritarian, totalitarian country. If you insult communism, if you insult the Chinese regime, who knows? The worst case scenario is you get sent to a prison camp. This individual looks like he's potentially on his way to a prison camp, or maybe he'll get spared. But let's play some of that clip. So the person interrogating says, "Why did you talk about traffic police online?" The guy replies, "Because they were confiscating motorcycles." Then the police officer asks, "So what's wrong with police confiscating motorcycles?" And the guy basically just says nothing's wrong with that. He apologized. He said it was because he had too much to drink that he wrote that, and he is forced to basically grovel before the interrogator, before the police officer. Pretty spooky stuff. You know, it looks like it's straight out of a novel, of a dystopian novel, or, you know, revisiting some of the worst moments of the 20th century that we think are behind us. But those things are still a reality in China. And again, it's time that Canada takes a stronger stance against this kind of actions. There's no way that China is our ally, and we need to wake up to that fact. Okay, let's move on. Some members of the Conservative Party have released a new video sort of standing up for Andrew Scheer, and I think that this is a good start. You know, there's been so much criticism of Andrew Scheer in the media over the last few months since the election, not just from the sort of typical left-wing voices in the media, but more and more from conservative voices or former conservative voices or people who were even involved in Andrew Scheer's campaign saying, hey, look, I don't think this guy is the right guy for the job. For a while there, it didn't really look like Andrew Scheer had anything to come back with. You know, he was kind of laying low. He wasn't defending himself. And you had to kind of wonder, you know, does this guy even really want the job? Does he want to continue to be leader of the Conservative Party? Well, we're finally seeing some signs of Andrew Scheer punching back. They've released a video comparing Andrew Scheer in 2019 to Stephen Harper, former prime minister, long-serving prime minister, and how he was treated in 2005 after he lost an election to Paul Martin and reduced Paul Martin's government to a liberal minority. So basically, they just go through a bunch of headlines that read like headlines are today, saying that, you know, Harper will be PM when roast pigs fly. Once again, the focus is on the shortcomings of Harper and co. Harper gets an A for effort, but scores an F for results. Tory leader has failed to sway voters. Harper ponders political future. Weary leader hails historic results despite failures in Ontario. Talk grows among Tories about who will succeed Harper. And then, of course, only a few months after all of these articles were written, there was a snap election and Canadians went to the polls again in 2006. And it was that point that Stephen Harper went on to win that election and get his first minority government. He got another minority in 2008. And then in 2011, he won the historic majority. So the Conservatives are sort of saying, you know, look, Andrew Scheer is not alone. This is sort of the typical reaction to a conservative leader. And there's some great quotes in this video from Stephen Harper that we should all keep in mind. Any conservative anywhere, anytime can, by criticizing other conservatives, become an instant and enormous media star, said Stephen Harper. Harper argued a successful conservative leader is someone who ignores such people and does not spend time attacking other conservatives. So once again, I agree with Stephen Harper 100%. I don't think that conservatives should waste their time nitpicking one another. We shouldn't fight internally either among the Conservative Party or just among the conservative community at large. We should focus our attention on the big picture, which is fighting against socialists and liberals who are trying to destroy Canada. And I think that we would be wise to take this advice. It's so easy to spend the months after the election kind of going after and attacking the leader of the Conservative Party who may have made some missteps. And of course, it's important to point those out. But the greater focus, again, should be on making sure that the country doesn't slide further and further towards socialism, which it is under the current Liberal government. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, and we will be back again on Thursday.